The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the aircraft hangar as Chief Petty Officer Sarah Ghost Martinez worked her magic on the jammed M134 minigun. Her hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, each movement calculated and deliberate. Grease stained her uniform, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool morning air rushing through the open hangar doors. What the world didn't know was that the woman fixing their most critical weapon system had already completed 3 classified missions behind enemy lines, earned 2 Purple Hearts, and could take down a target from 800 meters in complete darkness. But today she was just another mechanic in the eyes of everyone around her. That was exactly how she preferred it, until the new pilot walked in, took one look at the small tattoo barely visible beneath her rolled sleeve, and everything changed. Because some secrets are too dangerous to keep hidden, especially when lives depend on them. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her brow as she carefully dismantled the jammed M134 minigun for the 3rd time that morning. The weapon had been giving her team trouble for 2 days straight, and with the mission launch scheduled for 0800 hours, time was running out. The hangar buzzed with activity around her as other mechanics prepped aircraft and checked systems, but Sarah remained focused on her task. The minigun was a beautiful piece of engineering when it worked properly. 6 rotating barrels capable of firing up to 6,000 rounds per minute. It could turn the tide of any firefight. But right now it was just an expensive paperweight, and Sarah knew that meant good people might not come home. She had learned to work on weapons systems during her time as a Navy SEAL, though most people in the hangar had no idea about her combat background. As far as they knew, she was just another skilled mechanic who had transferred in from another base 6 months ago. Sarah preferred to keep it that way. The attention that came with being one of the few female SEALs often complicated things more than it helped. The problem with the minigun appeared to be in the feed mechanism. Someone had installed a replacement part that was just slightly out of specification, causing the belt feed to bind at critical moments. Sarah had seen this exact issue before, during a mission in Afghanistan where the helicopter door gunner's weapon had failed at the worst possible moment. That malfunction had cost them precious time and nearly got her squad killed. She pulled out her precision tools and began the delicate work of adjusting the feed mechanism. The metal was hot from repeated test firing, and she had to be careful not to burn herself as she made the necessary modifications. Around her, the sounds of the busy hangar continued, but Sarah had learned to block out distractions when lives depended on her work. Lieutenant Commander Jake Hawk Morrison had just finished his pre-flight briefing when he walked into Hangar 7 to check on the weapon systems for his Black Hawk helicopter. As the pilot in command, he took personal responsibility for every piece of equipment that would keep his crew alive during their upcoming mission. The operation was classified, but he knew they would be flying into hostile territory where every second and every bullet would count. Jake had been flying combat missions for 8 years, and he had developed a sixth sense about the people who worked on his aircraft. Good mechanics had a certain way of moving around weapons and equipment, a confidence that came from real understanding rather than just following procedures. As he approached the workstation where someone was hunched over his door gun, he could immediately tell this mechanic was different. The woman working on the minigun moved with the fluid precision of someone who had used these weapons in combat, not just maintained them. Her hands never hesitated, and she seemed to know exactly where each component belonged without consulting the technical manual that lay unopened beside her. Jake paused to watch her work, impressed by the efficiency of her movements. Sarah felt someone watching her and glanced up to see a tall pilot with Lieutenant Commander insignia studying her work. She nodded politely and returned her attention to the feed mechanism, making a final adjustment to the alignment. The man looked familiar, but she had met dozens of pilots since arriving at this base, and they all seemed to blur together after a while. "How's she looking?" Jake asked, stepping closer to get a better view of the weapon system. "Feed mechanism was binding," Sarah replied without looking up. "Someone installed a replacement part that was just slightly off tolerance. Should be good to go now, but I want to run a function test to be sure." Jake nodded, appreciating the thoroughness. Too many mechanics would have declared the weapon fixed without proper testing, which could lead to failures in the field. "Mind if I stick around for the test? This bird's been my ride for 2 years, and I like to know exactly what she can do. Sarah shrugged. Your call, sir. Just stay clear of the muzzle when I cycle it. She began the function test, manually cycling the barrels and checking the feed mechanism at various speeds. The weapon moved smoothly through its full range of motion, and the belt fed cleanly without any binding or hesitation. Satisfied with the mechanical operation, Sarah loaded a short belt of dummy rounds and prepared for the electrical test. The minigun spun up smoothly, the electric motor bringing the barrels to full speed within seconds. The feed mechanism pulled the dummy rounds through cleanly, ejecting the spent cases in a steady stream. Sarah nodded with satisfaction and shut down the system. Looks good, she said, beginning to clean up her tools. She'll put rounds down range when you need them. Jake watched as she efficiently packed her equipment, noting the way she handled each tool with the respect of someone who understood their importance. As she reached for the cleaning rags, her sleeve pulled up slightly, revealing the edge of a small tattoo on her forearm. Jake's breath caught as he recognized the distinctive design. The tattoo was small and subtle, easily missed by someone who didn't know what to look for. But Jake had seen that exact marking before, on the arm of a SEAL sniper who had saved his crew during a mission in Iraq 3 years ago. It was the unofficial mark of SEAL Team 6, known only to those who had earned the right to wear it. Sarah noticed the pilot staring and quickly pulled her sleeve down, but it was too late. The damage was done, and she could see the recognition in his eyes. She cursed silently, knowing that her carefully maintained anonymity had just been blown by a moment of carelessness. Chief Martinez, right? Jake said carefully, his voice taking on a different tone. I am Jake Motivational. I think we may have some mutual friends. Sarah studied his face more carefully, trying to place where she might have seen him before. The name Morrison was familiar, and as she looked at his features, a memory began to surface. 3 years ago, in Iraq, there had been a helicopter pilot who had refused to leave without his ground team, even when taking heavy fire. His call sign had been Hawk, and his real name had been Morrison. Iraq, 2021? Sarah asked quietly. The extraction from Fallujah that went sideways. Jake nodded slowly. You were the sniper on the rooftop. 3 confirmed kills while we were taking fire from the building next door. You bought us the time we needed to get everyone out. The memory came flooding back to Sarah. She had been part of a joint operation to capture a high-value target, but the mission had been compromised, and the team had found themselves pinned down in an urban firefight. The extraction helicopter had come under heavy fire, and it had looked like they might not make it out. From her position on a nearby rooftop, Sarah had been able to engage the enemy fighters who were targeting the helicopter. Her accurate fire had suppressed the threat long enough for the pilot to get his aircraft into position and extract the ground team. She had been the last one out, rappelling from the roof as enemy rounds sparked off the concrete around her. I remember that pilot, Sarah said with a slight smile. Crazy enough to hover in a hot LZ while taking fire from 3 directions. Thought you were going to get us all killed. The feeling was mutual, Jake replied. When I saw you sliding down that rope with bullets flying everywhere, I figured we were both insane. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, each remembering that chaotic day when split-second decisions and mutual trust had saved lives. The busy hangar continued around them, but for Sarah and Jake, the world had narrowed to this moment of recognition and shared understanding. So, Jake said eventually, what's a SEAL doing fixing door guns? Last I heard, you guys were too busy being mysterious to work on helicopters. Sarah laughed. Sometimes being mysterious gets old. Besides, someone has to make sure you pilots have working weapons. Can't have you flying into combat with jammed guns. Fair enough. But something tells me there's more to the story than just wanting a change of pace. Sarah's expression grew more serious. She glanced around the hangar to make sure no one was listening, then stepped closer to Jake. Let's just say that after 12 years of kicking down doors and taking names, I decided it might be time to try a different approach to serving my country. Sometimes the best way to help is from the shadows. Jake understood. He had seen enough combat to know that not every mission involved direct action, and not every hero wore their achievements on their sleeve. Sometimes the most important work was done by people who preferred to remain invisible. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're working on my aircraft, Jake said, Knowing that my weapons are being maintained by someone who actually understands how to use them in combat makes me sleep better at night. Sarah nodded and finished packing her tools. Just doing my job, sir. Same as always. As she prepared to leave, Jake called out to her. Chief Martinez? If you ever want to talk about the old days over coffee, I know a place off base that makes decent coffee and doesn't ask too many questions. Sarah paused at the hangar door and looked back at him. I might take you up on that, Lieutenant Commander. But let's keep the recognition between us for now. Some stories are better left untold. Jake nodded his understanding. In their line of work, discretion was often just as important as courage, and sometimes the greatest service was performed by those who never sought recognition for their sacrifice. As Sarah disappeared into the busy flow of personnel moving between hangars, Jake turned back to his helicopter. The minigun gleamed in the fluorescent lights, every component perfectly aligned and ready for action. He knew that when the time came to use it, the weapon would perform flawlessly, maintained by hands that understood the true cost of mechanical failure in combat. The upcoming mission would be dangerous, but Jake felt more confident knowing that his aircraft had been prepared by someone who shared his commitment to bringing everyone home alive. Sometimes fate put the right people in the right place at exactly the right time, and Jake suspected that Sarah Martinez's presence at this base was no accident. The hangar continued its bustling activity as crews prepared for the morning's operations, but something fundamental had changed. Two warriors had recognized each other across the divide of rank and service specialty, and in that recognition, a partnership had been forged that would prove crucial in the days to come. Neither of them knew it yet, but their chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would test everything they had learned about duty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. The mission ahead would require all of their skills and experience, and the bond they had just renewed would become the foundation for something much larger than either of them could have imagined. As Jake completed his pre-flight inspection and Sarah moved on to her next maintenance task, the wheels of fate were already turning, preparing to thrust them both into a situation where their combined expertise would mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. 3 days after their encounter in the hangar, Sarah found herself working late in the weapons maintenance facility when Jake appeared at her workstation. The base had settled into its evening rhythm, with most of the day's shift personnel having departed hours ago. The overhead lights cast long shadows between the rows of equipment, and the usual din of activity had given way to the quiet hum of ventilation systems and distant radio chatter. "Thought I might find you here," Jake said, settling onto a stool beside her workbench. Most people would have gone home by now. Sarah looked up from a rifle she was cleaning, noting that Jake was out of uniform and carrying 2 cups of coffee. Most people don't have 3 weapon systems that need to be ready for tomorrow's mission. Coffee smells good, though. Jake handed her one of the cups and took a sip from his own. "It's from that place I mentioned. Thought you might appreciate something better than the motor oil they serve in the base cafeteria." The coffee was indeed excellent, rich, and smooth with just the right amount of caffeine to keep Sarah alert for the remaining hours of work ahead. She found herself relaxing slightly as the warmth spread through her chest, a pleasant change from the constant tension she carried from years of combat deployments. "So," Sarah said, returning her attention to the rifle while savoring the coffee, "what brings you to the maintenance bay this late? Most pilots I know avoid weapons cleaning like it's contagious." Jake laughed. "Most pilots also don't get to have coffee with legends. Besides, I want to talk to you about tomorrow's mission." Sarah's hands paused in their methodical cleaning motion. "What about it? Command's been keeping details close to the vest, but I've been reading between the lines. This isn't a routine transport or reconnaissance mission. They're sending us somewhere dangerous, and they want the best people available." Sarah resumed cleaning the rifle, her movements becoming more deliberate. "And you think that's why I'm here? Not just because someone needed a good mechanic? I think you're here because someone very high up the chain of command knows exactly who you are and what you're capable of. The timing is too convenient, and your skill set is too specialized for this to be a coincidence." Setting down the cleaning rod, Sarah studied Jake's face in the harsh fluorescent lighting. She had learned to read people during her years in special operations, and she could see that he was genuinely concerned rather than just curious. There was something in his expression that suggested he knew more than he was letting on. "What are you telling me?" Sarah asked directly. Jake glanced around the empty maintenance bay to ensure they were alone, then leaned closer. "I've been flying classified missions for 8 years, and I've never seen this level of operational security for what's supposed to be a simple transport. No one will tell me where we're going or what we're carrying, but they've authorized me to take maximum fuel and full combat loadout." "That could mean anything," Sarah replied, though she could feel her instincts beginning to sharpen. "Maybe they're just being cautious. Maybe. Or maybe they're planning to send us somewhere that normal mechanics and standard procedures won't cut it. Somewhere that requires someone with your particular background and expertise." Sarah finished reassembling the rifle and set it aside, giving Jake her full attention. "You think this is about more than just maintaining weapons? I think you're here because someone knows we might need a SEAL on this mission, but they can't officially put one on the crew manifest. So instead, they assign the best combat engineer they can find to maintenance duty and wait for the right moment." The implications of Jake's theory settled over Sarah like a familiar weight. She had wondered why her transfer request had been approved so quickly, and why she had been assigned to this particular base despite having no prior experience with this type of aircraft maintenance. At the time, she had attributed it to the Navy's mysterious personnel decisions, but Jake's explanation made uncomfortable sense. "If you're right," Sarah said slowly, "then someone's been planning this for months. That level of operational preparation suggests something big and something dangerous. The kind of mission where having a SEAL hiding in plain sight as a mechanic might make the difference between success and catastrophe." They sat in silence for several minutes, both contemplating the possibilities. Sarah had spent enough time in military intelligence to know that the most important missions were often disguised as routine operations, and the most critical personnel were sometimes hidden in unexpected roles. "Tell me about your crew," Sarah said eventually. "Best I've ever worked with. My co-pilot is Maria Santos, former Air Force before she transferred to the Navy. Solid pilot with combat experience in Afghanistan. My crew chief is Tommy Chun, been flying with me for 3 years. Knows these birds better than the people who built them. And the door gunners?" Jake's expression darkened slightly. "That's where things get interesting. My usual team is on medical leave after a training accident last week. Command assigned me 2 replacements, both of them fresh out of advanced training with 0 combat experience." Sarah understood immediately. Experienced door gunners were crucial for helicopter operations in hostile territory, providing both defensive firepower and additional eyes for the pilot. Replacing seasoned veterans with rookies just before a dangerous mission was either extremely poor planning or a deliberate decision designed to create a personnel gap that would need to be filled. "They're setting us up," Sarah said quietly. "Whatever this mission is, they expect something to go wrong, and they want you to have an excuse to bring me along as additional crew. That's what I'm thinking. And if I'm right, that means we're walking into something a lot more dangerous than a routine transport mission." Sarah stood and began putting away her cleaning supplies, her mind already shifting into mission planning mode. "What do you know about the cargo we're supposed to be carrying?" "Officially, priority medical supplies for a forward operating base. But the cargo manifest is classified at a level I've never seen for medical equipment, and they're requiring armed escort for the entire flight. Medical supplies don't usually require armed escort, unless there's something very special or very valuable, or unless they're not actually medical supplies at all." Jake nodded. "My thoughts exactly. Which brings me to why I really came to find you tonight." Sarah turned to face him fully, recognizing the shift in his tone that indicated they were moving from speculation to planning. "I need to know if you're ready for this," Jake continued. "If my suspicions are correct, this mission is going to require all of our skills, and there won't be time for second-guessing or hesitation. I need to know that I can count on you the same way I could count on that sniper in Iraq." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "The question isn't whether you can count on me. The question is whether you're ready to trust someone who's been lying about who she really is for the past 6 months. I've been thinking about that. You weren't lying about who you are. You were just choosing which parts of yourself to show. That's something I understand better than most. And if I told you that there are parts of my service record that are so classified even you don't have clearance to read them. Parts that might change how you feel about having me on your crew. Jake considered this for a long moment before responding. Everyone in special operations has shadows in their past. What matters to me is what you choose to do when lives are on the line. I've already seen that in action. Sarah nodded slowly, feeling some of the tension she had been carrying begin to ease. In that case, you should know that I've been expecting something like this since the day I arrived. My transfer wasn't a career change. It was a deep cover assignment. Deep cover for what? To be exactly where I am right now, when you need someone with my skill set for a mission that officially doesn't exist. The revelation hung between them as they both processed its implications. Sarah had just confirmed that their encounter was not coincidence, and that forces beyond their understanding had been orchestrating events for months. How long have you known? Jake asked. Since about 10 minutes after we recognized each other. My handler contacted me that night and confirmed that the mission was moving to the next phase. Your handler? Someone very high up in Naval Special Warfare Command. Someone who's been planning this operation since before either of us knew it existed. Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the scope of what they were discussing. How high up? High enough to move personnel between units without anyone asking questions. High enough to modify mission parameters and crew assignments without triggering security reviews. High enough to authorize operations that don't officially exist. The maintenance base suddenly felt much smaller and less secure than it had moments before. Both of them understood that they were now part of something much larger and more dangerous than a simple transport mission, and that their conversation had just crossed several lines that couldn't be uncrossed. So what happens now? Jake asked. Now we prepare for tomorrow's mission and hope that all this planning and positioning is worth whatever we're being asked to do. But Jake, yeah, when this goes sideways, and it will go sideways, remember that I'm not just a mechanic anymore. I'm your ace in the hole, and I'm going to need you to trust my judgment even when it doesn't make sense from a pilot's perspective. Jake stood and extended his hand to her. Partners. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Partners. But next time you want to have a clandestine meeting, pick somewhere with better coffee. As they left the maintenance bay together, both of them understood that they had just committed themselves to a mission that would test everything they had learned about courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and unknown dangers, but they would face them together, bound by the unspoken understanding that some missions were worth any risk. The morning briefing room was unusually crowded for what was supposed to be a routine transport mission. Sarah sat in the back row, officially present as the backup crew chief, while Jake and his team occupied the front seats reserved for primary mission personnel. The atmosphere was tense, with more senior officers present than anyone expected for a simple medical supply run. Colonel Rebecca Torres, the base commander, stood at the front of the room beside a large map display that remained covered by a security sheet. Her expression was grave as she surveyed the assembled personnel, and Sarah could see the weight of command responsibility etched in the lines around her eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, Colonel Torres began. This mission is not what it appears to be in your preliminary briefings, and the stakes are considerably higher than anyone has been led to believe. Jake exchanged a quick glance with Sarah, confirming that their suspicions had been correct. Around the room, the assembled crew members shifted uncomfortably as they realized they were about to be drawn into something far more complex than they had signed up for. Colonel Torres pulled away the security sheet, revealing a detailed map of the mountainous border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Red circles marked several locations along known smuggling routes, with one particular valley highlighted in bright yellow. 18 hours ago, a joint Navy SEAL reconnaissance team went missing during a classified operation in this valley, Torres continued, pointing to the yellow-marked area. Their last communication indicated they had located and were moving to secure a high-value target, but they missed their scheduled check-in 12 hours ago. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. A missing SEAL team meant that some of the most highly trained warriors in the world were either dead, captured, or pinned down in hostile territory. Either way, it represented a significant threat to national security. Intelligence suggests the team may have been compromised by a larger enemy force than anticipated, Torres said. We have satellite imagery showing increased activity in the area, including the movement of heavy weapons and what appears to be foreign military advisors. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she studied the map. She recognized the terrain from previous operations in the region, and she knew how easy it would be for a small team to become trapped in those narrow mountain valleys. The geography was unforgiving, with limited escape routes and perfect defensive positions for anyone holding the high ground. Your mission, Torres continued, addressing Jake directly, is to conduct a combat search and rescue operation disguised as a medical supply run. You'll be carrying emergency medical equipment and a surgical team, but your primary objective is to extract our people and their target. Jake raised his hand. Ma'am, what kind of opposition are we expecting? And why isn't this being handled by dedicated Special Operations Aviation? Excellent questions. First, current intelligence indicates enemy forces numbering between 30 and 50 fighters, including trained snipers and crew-served weapons. Second, all of our Special Operations helicopters are currently committed to other classified missions, and we need someone who can blend in with routine supply flights. Sarah understood immediately. A Black Hawk flying a medical mission would attract much less attention than the specialized aircraft typically used for special operations. Enemy forces might not realize the true nature of the mission until it was too late. The good news, Torres said, is that we're not sending you in unprepared. Chief Martinez, would you please join me at the front? Sarah felt every eye in the room turn toward her as she made her way to the front. She had known this moment was coming, but the reality of stepping out of the shadows still felt strange after months of maintaining her cover. Chief Martinez is not actually assigned to aircraft maintenance, Torres announced. She is a Navy SEAL with extensive combat experience in this exact region. She volunteered for deep cover assignment to this base specifically to be available for this type of mission. The revelation sent murmurs through the room as Jake's crew members realized they had been working alongside one of the military's most elite warriors without knowing it. Sarah maintained her composure, but she could see the mix of surprise and respect on their faces. Chief Martinez will be serving as your tactical advisor and additional crew member for this mission, Torres continued. She has operated in this area before and knows the terrain, the enemy tactics, and the local population. More importantly, she has the combat experience necessary to help you navigate a complex battlefield situation. Maria Santos, Jake's co-pilot, raised her hand. Ma'am, what's our extraction plan if things go sideways? That's where the medical cover story becomes crucial. You'll be flying with a real surgical team led by Dr. Amanda Foster, who has volunteered to provide medical support for both our missing team and any civilians who might need assistance. If your mission is compromised, you'll have legitimate medical personnel on board to treat casualties. Torres clicked a remote control, and the map display zoomed in on the target valley. The missing team's last known position was here, about 2 kilometers from a village that has been controlled by hostile forces for the past 6 months. Intelligence suggests they may be pinned down in this area. Sarah studied the terrain carefully, noting the elevation changes and potential approach routes. The valley was narrow and heavily forested, with steep sides that would make helicopter operations extremely challenging. Any rescue attempt would require precise timing and careful coordination. Ma'am, Sarah said, what's the intelligence on enemy air defense capabilities in the area? Limited, but concerning. We've identified at least 2 man-portable air defense systems and possibly some crew-served anti-aircraft weapons. Nothing that should threaten a properly flown aircraft, but enough to make this mission very dangerous if you're detected. Jake leaned forward to study the map more closely. What about landing zones? That terrain doesn't look like it offers many options for getting a Black Hawk safely on the ground. There's a small clearing here. Torres pointed to a spot about 1 kilometer from the team's last known position. It's not ideal, but it's the best option available. You'll need to conduct a fast rope insertion and extraction. The complexity of the mission was becoming clear to everyone in the room. They would need to fly into heavily defended territory, locate a missing special operations team, and extract them along with their target, all while maintaining the cover story of a medical supply mission. Timeline, Sarah asked. Will's up in 2 hours. The missing team has been out of contact for 12 hours, which means they're either compromised or in serious trouble. Every minute we delay increases the risk to their safety. Tommy Chun, the crew chief, spoke up. What about our door gunners? My usual team is still on medical leave. Chief Martinez will serve as your primary door gunner, with her combat experience more than compensating for the personnel shortage. We're also assigning Corpsman Second Class Rodriguez as your secondary gunner. He's cross-trained on helicopter weapons systems. Sarah nodded approvingly. Rodriguez was a good choice, experienced enough to be reliable, but junior enough to follow orders without question. The crew composition was starting to make sense from a mission planning perspective. Questions? Torres asked, scanning the room. Dr. Foster, a tall woman with graying hair and steady hands, raised her hand. Colonel, what medical supplies are we actually carrying? I need to know what resources I'll have available. Full trauma surgery kit, blood products, and enough medical supplies to treat a dozen seriously wounded personnel. Your medical mission is real, Doctor, even if it's not the primary objective. And our cover story if we're intercepted or questioned. You're delivering emergency medical supplies to a village clinic that reported a cholera outbreak. All your documentation will support that story, and Dr. Foster has actually treated cholera patients in this region before. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering communication protocols, backup plans, and contingency procedures. Sarah found herself impressed by the thoroughness of the planning, even as she noted the numerous ways the mission could go wrong. As the meeting concluded, Torres called Jake and Sarah to the front. You two have worked together before, and that experience may be crucial for mission success. I'm counting on you to bring everyone home safely. Jake nodded grimly. We understand the stakes, ma'am. We'll get our people out. As the room emptied, Sarah lingered to study the map one final time. The terrain was challenging, the enemy was well-positioned, and the margin for error was virtually non-existent. But she had faced similar odds before, and she knew that sometimes the impossible missions were the ones that mattered most. Worry? Jake asked, joining her at the map display. Concerned, Sarah replied, but not about the mission itself. I'm worried about what we don't know. Missing intelligence, unexpected complications, changes in enemy strength or position. The unknowns are always the most dangerous part. True, but we've got good people, solid equipment, and a clear objective. Sometimes that's enough. As they left the briefing room to begin their final preparations, both of them understood that the next few hours would test everything they had learned about leadership, courage, and the bonds that hold military units together under pressure. The mission ahead would be dangerous, but it would also provide an opportunity to save the lives of fellow warriors who had put themselves at risk in service to their country. The clock was ticking, and somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, good people were counting on them to succeed against overwhelming odds. It was the kind of challenge that defined careers and forged legends, and both Sarah and Jake were ready to prove themselves worthy of the trust that had been placed in them. The Black Hawk helicopter cut through the morning air at 200 feet above the rugged Afghan terrain, its twin engines maintaining a steady rhythm that had become as familiar to Jake as his own heartbeat. Behind him, Sarah sat at the starboard door gun, her eyes constantly scanning the landscape below for signs of enemy activity. The transformation from mechanic to warrior had been seamless, and watching her work reminded Jake why SEALs had such a fearsome reputation. Dr. Foster and her medical team occupied the center of the aircraft, surrounded by enough trauma surgery equipment to handle multiple casualties. The doctor maintained her composure despite the obvious tension, occasionally checking her equipment or reviewing her notes on treating battlefield wounds. Her calm professionalism served as an anchor for the younger members of the crew who were experiencing their first combat mission. 2 minutes out from the LZ, Maria announced over the intercom from the co-pilot's seat. Still no sign of enemy activity, but the village looks quiet. Too quiet. Sarah adjusted her headset and keyed the microphone. Hawk, recommend we do a low pass over the target area before committing to the landing. Something feels wrong about the whole setup. Jake trusted Sarah's instincts completely. Her combat experience in this type of terrain was extensive, and she had survived dozens of missions by paying attention to details that others missed. If she sensed something was off, there was probably good reason for concern. Copy that, Ghost. Maria, take us around the north side of the valley. Let's get a better look at what we're dealing with before we put boots on the ground. The helicopter banked smoothly to the left, giving everyone aboard a clear view of the small village nestled in the valley below. From the air, it appeared normal enough, with cooking fires sending thin streams of smoke into the morning air and a few people moving between the buildings. But Sarah noticed immediately that something was wrong with the picture. "Hawk, look at the livestock," Sarah said quietly. "Goats and sheep are all clustered on the far side of the village, away from where we're supposed to land. Animals don't act like that unless they've been spooked by something." Jake followed her gaze and saw what she meant. The village's animals were indeed grouped together in an unnatural pattern, suggesting they'd been disturbed by unusual activity in the area. It was the kind of detail that most people would miss, but that could provide crucial intelligence about enemy positions. "Also notice there are no children visible," Dr. Foster added, having overheard their conversation. "In my experience working in these villages, you always see children playing outside during the morning hours. The fact that they're all inside suggests the adults know something dangerous is happening." Tommy Chun, monitoring the radio frequencies, suddenly held up his hand for attention, picking up radio chatter on known enemy frequencies. Can't make out the words, but there's definitely increased communications activity in this area. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and none of them painted a reassuring picture. The missing SEAL team had likely been detected, and enemy forces were now preparing for whatever rescue attempt they knew would be coming. The village appeared to be under enemy control, or at least observation. "Maria, take us higher and circle back toward the primary landing zone," Jake ordered. "We need to see what we're really walking into before we commit." As the helicopter gained altitude, Sarah began systematically scanning the surrounding ridgelines with her binoculars. Years of combat experience had taught her to look for the subtle signs that revealed hidden enemy positions. Unnatural shadows, glints of metal or glass, disturbed vegetation that indicated recent movement. "Got movement on the eastern ridge," Sarah reported. "Approximately 800 meters from the LZ. Looks like at least 3 individuals with what appears to be crew-served weapons." Jake processed this information quickly. Enemy positions on the high ground around their landing zone meant that any helicopter attempting to land would be vulnerable to coordinated fire from multiple directions. It was a classic ambush setup, and walking into it would likely result in the loss of both aircraft and crew. "Tommy, any word from our missing team on the emergency frequencies?" "Negative, Hawk. Either their radio is dead, they're maintaining communication silence, or..." He didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implication. Dr. Foster leaned forward between the pilot's seats. "Is there any other way to reach them? Maybe a different landing zone that would be less exposed?" Sarah studied the map, strapped to her knee, comparing it with the terrain visible below. "There's a small clearing about 2 clicks north of here. It's further from the team's last known position, but it's not overlooked by the ridgelines where we've spotted enemy activity. That would mean a longer ground movement to reach our people," Jake pointed out. "More time exposed, more chances for things to go wrong." "True, but it also means we don't fly straight into a prepared ambush. Better to take our chances on foot than lose the aircraft before we even get started." Jake weighed the options quickly. Both choices carried significant risks, but Sarah's logic was sound. A helicopter was useless if it was shot down before completing its mission, and enemy forces clearly knew about their primary landing zone. "Maria, plot a course for the alternate LZ. We'll insert there and move to the objective on foot." "Roger that." New LZ is about 4 minutes away at current speed. As they adjusted course, Sarah noticed something else that raised her concern. "Huck, check out the road leading into the village. Fresh tire tracks, and they look like they came from something heavier than civilian vehicles." Jake followed her direction and saw the telltale signs of recent military vehicle movement. The tracks were too wide and too deep to have come from the civilian trucks normally seen in rural Afghan villages. Someone had moved significant equipment into the area recently. "Could be our missing team's vehicles," Maria suggested hopefully. Negative, Sarah replied grimly. Wrong pattern. These tracks were made by Russian or Chinese military vehicles. Whatever moved through here wasn't American. The implications sent a chill through the aircraft. The presence of foreign military vehicles suggested that the missing SEAL team had stumbled into something much larger than a routine reconnaissance mission. They might be dealing with a significant enemy force equipped with modern weapons and training. Dr. Foster, you should know that this mission just became significantly more dangerous, Jake said. We may be facing a much larger and better equipped enemy force than originally briefed. I understand the risks, Commander, but those men are depending on us, and I didn't volunteer for this mission to turn back at the first sign of difficulty. Her quiet courage reminded Jake why he had chosen to serve alongside people like her. The medical personnel who volunteered for combat missions were often the bravest people in the military, willingly putting themselves in harm's way to save others without any expectation of glory or recognition. Ghost, what's your assessment of our chances if we proceed with the ground insertion? Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. Difficult, but manageable. We'll be outnumbered and operating in unfamiliar territory, but we have advantages. We know they're there, we have surprise regarding our approach route, and we have superior training and equipment. And if the missing team is already compromised, then we adapt and overcome. That's what we do. The alternate landing zone appeared ahead, a small clearing surrounded by dense forest that would provide concealment for their approach. It wasn't perfect, but it was significantly better than flying into a known ambush site. LZ looks clear, Maria reported. No sign of enemy activity in the immediate area. Tommy, prep for fast rope insertion. We're not going to linger on the ground any longer than absolutely necessary. As the crew prepared for the insertion, Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her rifle was loaded and ready, her medical kit was easily accessible, and her communications gear was functioning properly. She had done this type of mission dozens of times before, but each one required the same methodical preparation that could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Dr. Foster, you and your team will remain with the aircraft, Jake instructed. If we're not back in 2 hours, you'll return to base and report our status. Understood. But please remember that if you find wounded personnel, I can provide medical care that might save lives. Don't hesitate to call for assistance if you need it. The helicopter flared to a hover over the landing zone, and Sarah could see Tommy preparing the fast rope system that would allow them to insert quickly and efficiently. Below them, the forest floor looked peaceful, but she knew that appearances could be deceiving in this part of the world. 30 seconds, Jake announced. Sarah performed her final equipment check and prepared to step into the unknown. Somewhere in the mountains ahead, fellow warriors were counting on them to succeed against overwhelming odds. It was the kind of mission that defined careers and tested the bonds between military personnel, and she was ready to prove herself worthy of the trust that had been placed in her. As the rope deployed and the insertion began, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the transition from planning to action. The easy part was over, and now their training, experience, and courage would determine whether they could bring their people home safely. The forest floor was soft underfoot as Sarah and Jake moved through the dense undergrowth toward the missing SEAL team's last known position. They had been moving for 40 minutes, covering ground carefully while maintaining communication silence. The afternoon sun filtered through the canopy above, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that could either conceal their movement or betray their position to watching eyes. Sarah held up her hand, signaling Jake to stop as she detected something ahead. Years of combat experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about the forest around them felt wrong. The normal sounds of wildlife had diminished, replaced by an unnatural quiet that suggested human presence nearby. Through her rifle scope, Sarah could see the edge of a small clearing about 100 meters ahead. At the far side, partially concealed by fallen logs and natural vegetation, she could make out what appeared to be a hastily constructed fighting position. The camouflage was good enough to fool most observers, but not someone with her training and experience. Jake eased up beside her and followed her line of sight. "How many?" he whispered. At least two, possibly three. Looks like they're dug in for a sustained fight. Question is whether they're ours or theirs. Sarah adjusted her scope and continued her careful observation. The fighting position showed signs of recent construction, with freshly cut branches and recently disturbed earth. Whoever had built it understood proper defensive techniques and had positioned it to command excellent fields of fire across the approaches to the clearing. A slight movement caught her attention, and she focused on a figure barely visible through the camouflage. The person was wearing what appeared to be American military equipment, but that didn't necessarily mean they were friendly. Enemy forces often used captured equipment to confuse rescue operations. "I need to get closer for positive identification," Sarah whispered. "Cover me from here and be ready to provide suppressing fire if this goes wrong." Jake nodded and settled into a stable firing position that would allow him to engage multiple targets if necessary. He wasn't a trained sniper like Sarah, but his marksmanship skills were solid enough to be effective at this range. Sarah began her careful approach, moving from cover to cover while keeping the fighting position under constant observation. The terrain was challenging, with numerous fallen trees and dense undergrowth that could either conceal her movement or trap her if she chose the wrong route. As she drew closer, Sarah could hear quiet voices speaking in English. The accent and terminology were distinctly American, which strongly suggested these were the missing SEAL team members rather than enemy forces. But operational security demanded confirmation before revealing her position. At 50 meters distance, Sarah could finally make out enough detail to be certain. The soldiers in the fighting position were indeed wearing authentic American equipment, and their tactical positioning showed the kind of professional competence that marked elite military units. More importantly, one of them was treating what appeared to be a wounded comrade, using medical techniques that enemy forces wouldn't possess. Sarah keyed her radio twice in a prearranged signal that meant friendlies identified, then began her approach to the fighting position. She moved slowly and deliberately, keeping her weapon pointed down, but ready in case her assessment was wrong. "American forces approaching your position," she called out when she was 20 meters away. "Navy SEAL coming in." The response was immediate and professionally cautious. "Advance and be recognized. What's the current authentication code?" Sarah provided the current daily authentication sequence, and the tension in the clearing immediately decreased. A figure emerged from the fighting position, rifle lowered but still ready, and Sarah could see the distinctive patches and equipment of a Navy SEAL operator. "Chief Martinez, Team 6, Sarah identified herself as she approached. "We're here to get you out." "Petty Officer First Class Davidson, Team 8, the man replied. "Never been so glad to see another SEAL in my life. We've been pinned down here for 18 hours. Sarah could see that Davidson's team had been through a difficult fight. Their uniforms were torn and dirty, several members showed signs of injury, and their equipment showed the wear of sustained combat. But their fighting spirit was clearly intact, and their defensive position was professionally constructed. "Status report," Sarah requested. "4-man team, 2 walking wounded, 1 serious injury. We completed our primary objective, but got hit by a much larger enemy force during extraction. Lost our radio in the initial contact, which is why we missed our check-ins." Primary objective? Davidson gestured toward a figure sitting against a tree at the back of the position. "High-value target, Iranian military advisor who's been training local forces. Guy's worth his weight in intelligence gold, but he took a bullet during the firefight." Sarah could see that the prisoner was indeed wounded, with a makeshift bandage around his shoulder that showed signs of recent bleeding. Keeping him alive for interrogation would be crucial for intelligence purposes, but it would also complicate their extraction significantly. Enemy strength and disposition. At least 30 fighters with crew-served weapons. They've got us surrounded, but haven't been able to assault our position effectively. Problem is, we're running low on ammunition and medical supplies. Jake's voice crackled through Sarah's earpiece. "Ghost, we've got movement on the north side of your position. Looks like enemy forces maneuvering for an attack." Sarah quickly surveyed the tactical situation. The SEAL team's position was strong defensively, but they were clearly outnumbered and running low on resources. The approaching enemy movement suggested that time was running out for a peaceful extraction. Davidson, can your wounded move? Jones took shrapnel in the leg, but he can walk. Miller's got a concussion, but he's functional. The HVE is the biggest problem. He's lost a lot of blood and needs medical attention soon. Sarah made her decision quickly. We've got a bird with a full surgical team about 2 clicks north. We need to move now before the enemy completes their encirclement. As she spoke, the sound of automatic weapons fire erupted from the forest around them. Jake's voice came through her earpiece with urgent intensity. Contact north. Multiple enemy positions advancing on your location. The firefight that followed was intense, but brief. Sarah and the SEAL team laid down coordinated suppressing fire that forced the attacking enemy forces to take cover, buying them precious minutes to prepare for movement. The professional cooperation between the 2 SEAL units was seamless, with each operator instinctively understanding their role in the larger tactical picture. Smoke out, Davidson called, deploying screening smoke to conceal their movement as they prepared to abandon their position. Sarah coordinated the withdrawal with Jake's covering fire, ensuring that the wounded team members and the prisoner could move safely while maintaining security against pursuing enemy forces. The 2-kilometer movement to the landing zone would be challenging under normal circumstances, but with wounded personnel and enemy pursuit, it would test every aspect of their training and experience. The extraction movement became a running battle as enemy forces attempted to intercept them at multiple points along their route. Sarah found herself alternating between leading the evacuation and serving as rearguard, using her superior marksmanship skills to eliminate threats that could have overwhelmed the group. Jake proved invaluable as an Overwatch sniper, using his elevated position to provide covering fire that allowed the ground team to break contact when enemy forces got too close. His accurate shooting and comm radio communications kept the evacuation moving when it could have easily bogged down into a prolonged firefight. Dr. Foster's voice came through their radios as they approached the landing zone. Medical team, standing by. Prepare wounded for immediate treatment upon arrival. The sight of the Black Hawk helicopter waiting in the clearing was one of the most beautiful things Sarah had ever seen. The aircraft's crew chief had already prepared the cabin for casualties, and Dr. Foster's medical team was ready to provide immediate trauma care for the wounded. As they loaded the wounded SEAL team members and the high-value prisoner, Sarah felt the satisfaction that came from mission accomplishment under difficult circumstances. They had located and extracted the missing personnel, secured valuable intelligence assets, and done so without losing any American lives. Outstanding work, Ghost, Jake said as they lifted off from the landing zone. That was textbook special operations from start to finish. Sarah settled into her door gun position for the flight home, maintaining watch for enemy activity until they were well clear of the danger area. Just doing the job, Hawk. Same as you. But as the Afghan landscape rolled past below them, Sarah reflected on how the mission had reinforced the importance of trust, competence, and shared sacrifice in military operations. The successful extraction had required every member of the team to perform at their highest level, and the bonds forged under pressure would last long after the mission reports were filed and forgotten. Dr. Foster worked efficiently to stabilize the wounded personnel, her steady hands and calm professionalism providing exactly the kind of medical care that could mean the difference between life and death. Watching her work, Sarah was reminded that heroism took many forms, and that sometimes the greatest courage was shown by those who chose to heal rather than harm. As they crossed back into friendly airspace, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The mission had been successful, their people were safe, and valuable intelligence had been secured. It was the kind of operation that reminded everyone involved why they had chosen to serve their country, and why the bond between military personnel transcended rank, service branch, and individual differences. The mechanic who had been quietly maintaining aircraft for 6 months was once again a warrior, but the experience had taught her that both roles were equally important in the larger mission of defending freedom and protecting the innocent. Sometimes the greatest victories were achieved not through dramatic action, but through the quiet competence of professionals who understood their duty and were willing to risk everything to fulfill it.